Hi Greedy 3Ds. Now when it comes to painting faces and skin tones especially, there has been a guy that I am in absolute awe of that does a fantastic job on faces and skin tones. This is Steve Bird, and I'll put a link in the description where you can see his work. Now using his techniques I've managed to paint this Spock figure, and I will talk you through the process. So the first thing we need to do is we need to place a primer on, and I'm going to use a white primer on here. I'm using a Spock head, a Captain Kirk head and a Hicks head as examples here. The Spock and the Kirk are from Wicked, and the Hicks head is from Cuton Sculpts. I'll put a link in the description where you can get them all from. Now when you've got your white on, this stuff here is an absolute essential. We're going to be using this an awful lot. This is some varnish, and I'll put a link in the description where you can get it. You must make sure you shake it really well and just give it a fine mist across each time. And when you've gone through every stage, we're going to be drying with a hairdryer, misting with the varnish before we move on to the next stage. I'm starting off with this yellow ochre colour, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix this with a little bit of water just to turn it into a wash. I'm using a nice big brush, and I am going to lather it across the face. Now remember, we've sealed this face, so that white is sealed underneath a layer of varnish, and I'm just going to get this yellow into all of his crevices and nooks and crannies. Now I am absolutely no expert when it comes to painting faces, so I'm learning this process as I go through, and I thought I'd take you guys with me on the process. Get yourself a sponge. Now Steve uses makeup sponges. I didn't have any of those, so I'll just use an old sponge from the kitchen that I've got and just ripped in half, because the texture of the sponge is what helps give the skin its texture and detail. And I'm just going to dab all of that wash off until it is all off. Once it's off, get your hairdryer and dry it. Same procedure between each layer, so make sure it's all dry, get as much off as you can, and then give it a fine misting of varnish. And this is what it's going to look like. There's a little bit of yellow that's pooled, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. You can see the hue on there. There's the Captain Kirk head as well, and I'll also show you the Hicks. The Hicks is a very small head, so the colours come out a little bit different in each. Moving on now to some fire red, exactly the same procedure. Pop it down into your mixing tray, add some water and mix it down to a wash, and apply it liberally all across the Spock head. So now again we're applying our second coat, we won't call the primer a coat, our second coat of red wash across the Spock head here. And don't forget, we varnished it, so if you don't varnish it they'll all just merge into each other, and we don't want that. We want to give some definition in each layer. Using that sponge again, I'm going to dab it and get it off. The idea, I guess, is to use a clean part of the sponge each time. I don't want to be rubbing yellow on red and red on yellow, etc. I just want to be getting it all off. Get as much off as you can, dab it and rub it and dab it until it's all off, and that's what we've got. You can see some of the hues in there, some of the pinks, some of the yellows and the reds. All these different models as well have come out a slightly different colour. Now I don't know if that's just down to my technique or the actual models themselves, because some of them have got more detail. Going on to some brown sand colour now for the third wash, exactly the same. A little bit of the brown, mix it down with a little bit of water into a wash, and then just splatter it on there. Do not be afraid of this. You really don't be scared of it. Get it all the way over there. Don't forget it's a wash, and we're taking it off long before anything dries. We're not leaving it on there to dry, because that would give us a completely different effect, and one that we don't want. Another clean edge of the sponge, and I'm getting absolutely everything off Spock. I'm drying him with the hairdryer. We're getting the pattern here, and once he's dried, yep, you've guessed it, thin coating of varnish. Make sure you shake it really well. And that's what Spock looks like now with the 3 washes on. Looks like a wonderful colour, to be honest. Kirk again, it's got a little bit of a different shade, a bit of hue to him, as has Hicks. Hicks looks a little bit more paler. Now basic skin tone from AK is the next, and we're going to do, yep, you guessed it, exactly the same. We're going to water it down, we're going to turn it into a wash, and we're going to get this one on. Now this one is an important layer. What you've got to do with this, when you get it on and splatter it all over again into all the nooks and all the crannies. Once it's on there and you're going to be getting it off, there's 2 steps to this. Use the sponge to get it off and get as much off as you can, then get another clean sponge and get as much off, get the rest of it off, really get it off before it dries on. This is the important layer. And give it a dry with a hairdryer, give it a light coating with your varnish. Next one is a flesh wash from Pro Acryl. Now this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to get it into all the nooks and the crannies of his face, into the lines around his forehead and his ears and his eyes and the nasolabial folds and the fold under his nose. We're going to fill all those with this darker colour, and that's what it's for, and that's what we want to do. Get it on there, lay it on nice and thick. There was no need to water this one down. Get it all across there, and yep, nice clean sponge, and get it off. Now the aim of this now is to get it off the outer layer with leaving some of the wash in the inner parts of his face. And you can see there, if we have a look, he's got some darker areas under his eyes and around his nose, and again exactly the same with old Captain Kirk and with Hicks. Next step is to use some of this Kislev Flesh, a Citadel colour, and we're going to do it a bit different. We're not going to wash this, we're going to dry brush. So get the majority off on a bit of kitchen roll, and then use your back of your hand to get the rest off. So we just want a little bit of paint left on there as a dry brush, and all you're going to do with this is go against the grain of his face. Where the folds are and where the lines are, if we go down them, it's just going to fill them with the colour, so we don't want to do that. We want to leave the darker wash in there, and we want to dry brush across the top, going the opposite way to any lines that you see, like there across his side of his face and across his ears. Leave the lines as they are, so it's darker in those grooves and it's lighter on the outside, and just keep going all the way across until you get that real light hue with the darker areas sat in the inside and the lighter areas on the outside, as any natural skin would look. We're going to varnish it all off again, and we're going to move on to some red tone. This is an Army Painter quick shade, and again this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to use a fine detail brush to get into the lines and crevices of his face. Like you can see here, I'm putting it into around the eye, and I'm using a tethering brush, a rough brush, just to smooth all that red away. So same again here, around the eye, layer it on, don't be afraid. Get your smoothing brush, get a nice thick brush, and just layer it in and blend it and merge it into the rest of the skin. We're going to be doing that across all the lines around his face, especially around the nostrils there, that part of the skin that goes underneath, and I'm also going to be giving it a coat inside the nostrils. So get it inside and around the nose, and then use that feathering brush, that smoothing brush, to just even it out. You don't want to leave too many lines about. We want to make sure that that red gets merged in, or it'll look too thick. It's always a good idea to go along the hairline as well, so get a nice thick coat along the hairline and do exactly the same thing. Now if they've got beards, go along the beard line as well. So feather it in, paint it on, feather it in, you get the gist. And dry it with a hairdryer. Same procedure, done this before, varnish, etc. Now go on to some Harvester Flesh, and we're going to use that dry brush on there again. Exactly the same technique. This is just a lighter colour going across the grain. We don't want to take away from some of that red. Don't go with the grains of the face, don't go with the lines of the face, go opposite them to just highlight them, so we get darker on the inner parts and lighter on the outer parts. It's the same technique really, it's not rocket science, it's just knowing which colours to pop on in what order. Now we're going to go back to the Pro Acryl Flesh Wash, and I'm going to take a brush, a raggedy brush really, I'm going to pop some on and I'm going to flicker it on like freckles. If you put too much on, just use your sponge to get it off quickly, but get some pattern on his face, get some freckling on his face. And that's what the two faces look like. We'll start off with Kirk. I'm really pleased with how he's come out there. That's a nice looking skin tone. I hope you agree. Now I'm no expert on this. This is the first time I've tried this technique, but I think it's worked. And I will practice as time goes forward to get it to work better, but I'm really pleased how they've come out. That Spock, let's have a quick look at Hicks. Yep, all good, really happy. I've not gone over how I've painted the eyes, etc., and how I finished them off, but I'll just show you what they all look like when they're finished. So there's Spock with his eyes in and his hair done, etc. And the contrast of the hair and the skid just makes it look wonderful. And I'll show you Captain Kirk too. I hope you found that useful. Thank you, Steve Bird, for allowing me to use your techniques. Make sure you go and check out his work. He does some awesome stuff. If you like what you see on the channel, please think about subscribing to the channel. Think about joining our Greedy 3D Patreon. I really would be interested to know what you think. So leave me a comment in the description. And I hope you found that useful. Again, thank you, Steve. Carry on with the fantastic work, mate. And I'll see you next time real soon on Greedy 3D.